There's a huge fundamental crisis happening in modern Christian evangelicalism. Something is seriously broken in the way faith is shared. A whopping 80 to 90% of people who make a decision for Christ eventually just fall away from the faith. Think about that. That's not a small leak. That's a catastrophic failure rate. And it's not just that one statistic. It's a whole cascade of problems. You've got these incredibly high rates of people leaving, which then leads to pastors and leaders feeling completely burned out and discouraged. That, in turn, contributes to churches actually shrinking instead of growing. It creates this vicious cycle where the core mission just kind of gets lost in the shuffle. This single statistic is the explosive claim that really sets the stage for everything we're about to look at. And here's where that number comes from. A quote by author and evangelist Ray Comfort. He's arguing that the vast majority of people who make some kind of commitment in the modern church, well, they just don't stick around. They fall away. The question you have to ask is, why? Why is this happening? And they point to big problems with both the message being preached and the actual structure of the church itself. According to Ray Comfort, the absolute core of the problem is this. The modern gospel has been packaged and sold as a kind of life enhancement product. You know the message. Come to Jesus and he'll fix your marriage, give you peace, give you joy, make you fulfilled. The whole appeal is based on making your current life better. And this is where his parachute analogy comes in. And it's brilliant at explaining this. So imagine two guys on the plane. The first guy is told, hey, put on this parachute, it'll make your flight so much better. But it's heavy, it's uncomfortable, and the other passengers are kind of laughing at him. He gets fed up pretty fast and takes it off, feeling like he was lied to. But the second guy, he's told, hey, this plane is going down and you have to jump from 25,000 feet. He doesn't just put on the parachute. He clings to it for dear life. He couldn't care less if it's heavy or if people mock him because his mind is on the jump. He's just incredibly grateful to have it. And that's the whole point, right? When you promise someone an improved flight, a better life, and instead they run into hardship, temptation, or persecution, they feel betrayed. They feel like they were sold a product that didn't work the way it was advertised, so they just get rid of it. And this is the engine that's creating that massive 80 to 90% fallout. But the problem isn't just the message. Church itself is failing to get the job done for 5 big reasons. And it points the finger inward at a lack of real concern for the lost, a lack of knowledge of what to do, a lack of courage to actually do it. And it goes deeper to a lack of faith in the message itself and a crippling lack of focus on what's supposed to be the main mission. And this brings us to a whole other layer, a leadership crisis. This quote from Moses identifies a huge structural problem, clericalism, which is basically where leaders are burning out because they feel like they have to do all the work themselves, just like Moses did. And that kind of burnout makes any kind of sustainable outreach totally impossible. Okay, so that's the diagnosis. A flawed message combined with a flawed internal structure. Pretty bleak. So what's the solution? This first solution is pretty provocative. Comfort calls it hell's best kept secret. And the core idea is to reintroduce God's law, specifically the 10 Commandments, as a schoolmaster. The thinking is, before you can ever appreciate a savior, you have to first understand that you need saving. The law is presented as the tool that shows a person just how far they fall short in the eyes of God. It's really framed like a medical diagnosis. You wouldn't be grateful for a cure for a disease you didn't even know you had. In the exact same way, offering the cure of grace is kind of pointless, maybe even offensive, until a person is first convinced of the terminal disease of sin, and the law is the diagnostic tool. And this isn't some brand new idea. Historical evangelists like A.B. Earl to show that this used to be the standard approach. It's like, you don't try to save a man who thinks he's just happily swimming along. First, you have to convince him that he's actually drowning. Only then is he going to cry for help and reach for that lifeline. So that's the proposed change to the message. But what about that broken church structure that was burning out all its leaders? Well, blueprint for leadership, directly from the story of Moses. 5 core principles that Moses had to learn the hard way. The whole goal is to shift from a one-man show to a system of multiplication. It's all about training others, grounding them in the Bible, showing them the practical work, and then transferring both spiritual authority and, this is key, the burden of the work. Remember how Moses was feeling totally crushed by the weight of it all? Well, this first principle is the direct fix. Leaders aren't meant to do all the ministry. They're meant to train others to do the ministry. The goal is to start a chain reaction where the people you train go on to train others, and so on. And what's really interesting here is how practical this is supposed to be. This model isn't about spending years and years in a classroom. It's designed to be short-term, hands-on training. 50% teaching, 50% doing. The idea is to train the hands, not just the head. And this last principle, this is a big one. It draws a super important line in the sand. The source warns against leaders who are always reaching for more authority, for lordship. Instead, it says true leaders transfer the burden and the responsibility of the work to others. The model is one of support, of being the foundation under the work, not the lord over it. And this quote is really held up as the bedrock for that entire leadership philosophy. The ultimate example of leadership isn't command and control. It's service and sacrifice. Okay, let's pull all these threads together. Back to evangelism. And that quote right there really nails the central argument. And the modern gospel is often presented as a life enhancement, something to make your flight through life smoother. The problem is, when turbulence hits, when real trials come, those converts feel betrayed and they ditch the parachute. The proposed alternative? Warn people about the jump first, the reality of sin and judgment. So they grab onto faith not for a better life, but because they desperately know they need to be saved. What if a police officer first shows you the radar gun, proves you are going 55 and a 15, and hands you the ticket? Suddenly, that offer to pay the fine becomes the most incredible news you've ever heard. The bad news makes the good news make sense. And from this viewpoint, that's exactly what God's law, specifically the 10 Commandments, is designed to do. It's not a ladder you climb to earn salvation. Not at all. It's more like a mirror. It's meant to be a schoolmaster that holds up God's perfect standard and shows us where we've all fallen short. It's what stops us from saying, I'm a pretty good person, and instead helps us see our real spiritual state. So this all gets boiled down into one simple guiding principle. The idea is to use the law to speak to the proud, to the self-righteous, to show them their true need. Because only then, once someone is humbled by what they see in that mirror, can they truly and gratefully receive the offer of grace, which is presented as God's completely free gift of forgiveness. So how do all these pieces, the motivation, the method, the leadership, how do they all come together? To boil it all down, here are the key takeaways. First, you have that startling claim of an 80 to 90% failure rate. Second, the diagnosis that a life enhancement gospel is creating false converts. And third, the two-part solution, a theological shift in the message back to using the law before grace, and a practical shift in method toward a servant-based leadership model that multiplies workers instead of burning them out. Ultimately, these sources force us to ask a really provocative question. They're basically arguing that in the rush to create a more attractive, less offensive message, the modern church may have actually lost its effectiveness. And they leave us with this thought. If the real goal isn't just a quick decision, but a lasting, genuine convert, then what is the true cost of a comfortable message?